One of the ways that we've reduced church life, I think, is by actually just jettisoning church discipline altogether. We've just let it go. And so I'll just give you an interesting story about that. Back in 1981, I was called to be the pastor of a church, fairly young fellow still at that point, and because I'm much younger than I look, I promise you that. But anyway, fairly young pastor, and went to this church, and the church had recently celebrated its 100th anniversary. Now, as a member of that church, there was a man who was known throughout the area as a kind of a local historian. He had written a history book about the small town that the church was connected to, and he had written history books about several other local issues and local things, and he was a good writer. And so when they got ready to celebrate their centennial as a church, they asked this fellow if he would write a history for their church, a history of their church. Among other things that he did by way of research, he went back. The church had the minutes of all their business meetings from literally day one for 100 years. 100 years of business meetings, and he read every page of it. He told me later he read every page, and I'm just thinking, wow. I don't think I could bring myself to do it. But he said, that in doing so, he discovered something, and he wrote this into the history book that he actually prepared for the church. And as a new pastor, I was interested in knowing the history of the church, so I read the whole book. It wasn't very big, didn't take very long, but I read the book. And he had a whole small chapter on church discipline. Remember, they had just celebrated their centennial in about 1980 or so, and I'm now there in 81. So going back, of course, to before the turn of the 20th century. And so they had lots of interesting disciplinary procedures where people were actually disciplined in various ways for swearing in public. If they used God's name in vain in public, they would be brought before the church elders, and they would be asked to in some way either apologize publicly and various things before they could be received back into the church fellowship. There were others who were in trouble for being seen working. Now, this was a farming community where this church was. Some of them were seen working on Sunday. And you would think that farming, well, of course, in those days, they didn't even allow themselves to harvest or cut hay or anything on Sunday. And a couple of guys got in trouble because they tried to do it and they thought nobody would see it. They were found. And then there were some other racier items. There was a couple of adultery things and that sort of thing. So all that happened. But then right at the end of that chapter, the author of the book stated something that I had suspected for a long time. And that is, he basically proved that there had been no practical church discipline for about 50 years. And I've been using that number. I said, I don't think we've had church discipline for probably around 50 years. And that was just a kind of a guess, a kind of a feeling based on just snippets of conversation. But he said, for reasons that I cannot understand, the last record that we have of church discipline at our church was about 1930, and there's been no evidence of church discipline since then from the records, the minutes of our meetings. And so that's almost exactly 50 years. It was practically perfect. And so it is interesting that we've jettisoned this. Now, the Lord Jesus indicated that he intended for us to help one another out in our Christian life. That if we see, Matthew chapter 18 is very famous. If we see a brother who's committing a sin, we need to go to them in private. We need to ask them to stop. We need to, and we can pronounce forgiveness if they agree. It doesn't take the pastor, just two Christians, one sees the other. Maybe it is using God's name in vain. Maybe it is looking at pornography. That would be a modern example, but whatever it might be. And you see that they're doing this, and you go to them and you say, dear brother, you've got to stop. And if the brother repents and says, I will stop, and gives evidence of that, then you allow them to leave it there. If they persist, then you bring an elder or two and you try to straighten it out. And if they continue to persist in their sin and make it an open affair, by then it becomes an open affair, whatever it is that they're doing, then you bring them before the congregation and you cast them out. You have that example, then you have 1 Corinthians chapter 5, where Paul says, you've got a problem. You've got a young man who's living with his father's ex-wife. Now, it says his mother, but it really means his stepmother, and it's very likely she's an ex-wife or a second wife or whatever it may be. It's not his blood mother, but this young man is living with a woman he's not married to, and in fact, a woman who either is or has been married to his father. And they're living openly in sin, and they're saying, we don't need to worry about this, even though it may be considered a sin in the world's eyes. We're saved by grace and through faith, and it's not of works, lest any man should boast. So who cares what we do with our personal lives? And Paul says that is a lie from hell. The next time you get together, you need to discipline this man. You need to throw him out of the congregation. You need to disfellowship yourself from him. And to deliver such a one unto Satan is what Paul says actually is the exact quote. And so there's discipline there, and there are other examples of discipline referred to throughout the New Testament, and there's been many examples of discipline all the way through the Bible. Now, you ask, well, what's the purpose of discipline? The fact is, all of us grow weak in our Christian lives. There are days when we're less motivated than other days, and it helps if somebody comes alongside. And so the Bible speaks of a milder form of discipline as exhorting one another, especially as we see the end times approaching, or as we see the end of life approaching, as we see our going to be with the Lord, as it draws near, for whatever reason, we need to exhort one another to holy living, because we're someday going to stand before God and give an account for all the deeds that are done in the flesh, according to 2 Corinthians chapter 5. And so I think we have lost something in discipline. Now, there are some obstacles in modern times that didn't exist before. For example, people feel that they can change churches at the drop of a hat. They do so for the most shallow reasons, just because they've got a better worship band at some other church. So let's go there where the music is really happening, and we'll go there. Or we like the way this other man teaches the Bible, so we'll go there. And we've kind of come to the place where we treat many people actually are opposed to church membership in any formal sense at all. They don't want to put themselves under the discipline of a group of elders or the body of Christ. And it's been my experience that when you do try to initiate discipline where somebody has horribly abused church life in some way, and you kind of have to wait till it's a pretty bad abuse, or you don't get anybody to agree with you at all, and then you try to institute some form of discipline, that person will then just simply leave the church and will forestall the process of discipline by just simply removing themselves. There have been a couple of examples I've heard of in the United States where people have actually sued a church for embarrassing them through church discipline and that kind of thing. And so there are a lot of reasons why churches are hesitant, but I can guarantee you that it matters. For example, the last disciplinary action that I was part of at a church where I served as a pastor, well, I'll just say the church I served in Calgary until 2018. The last area of discipline I was involved in was a gross form of tale-bearing. I mean, with malice and evil intent to tear down people's lives by telling false stories about them to other people. And when we tried to bring this person into discipline, they just simply left the church and left with, I can tell you, with a lot of imprecations hurled our way as they walked out the door. And that was done, though, with the elders and so forth. But one thing we did learn in the last church where I served, that even if the disciplinary process was forestalled, and we attempted 3 disciplinary processes in the 12 years I was there, and in each case the person being disciplined forestalled it by leaving. Nevertheless, in each case, as we reported the event to the church, and we did this, we felt that it was necessary that we would explain to the whole congregation what the elders had attempted to do, what their goal was, and the reason why they were attempting to bring discipline into this person's life. It made a difference in the way other people looked at themselves. They, for example, in the area of gossip, they examined themselves. It changed the way people related to one another because they had seen that this is a serious matter, and we need to be careful about what we say about other people behind their backs, or we need to be careful about what we are actually saying about doctrine. For example, one was over the fact that we had a teacher who was teaching false doctrine, and we tried to correct them. We spent quite a while trying to correct them, and when it became clear that we were going to have to discipline them publicly because they were not correctable, and then when they knew we were going to be public about it, they left. But the church was better off because they left, because no longer were these false doctrines being taught among the people. And so I believe we've damaged the church by leaving off church discipline. We've weakened it, and I think that it's really important that we get get back to that in our church life. But we're so ready to be kind to the person we're disciplining that we forget that we have to get past the embarrassment of exposing them publicly and just do it. We had to, I'll be honest with you, I didn't mention this in what I just said now, but we had to learn the lesson. Of the 3, we did not report the first one. And it came back to bite us in the sense that 2 or 3 years later, people were still asking, well, what happened to them? Why did they leave? Right, yeah. And we were like, because we'd made a decision as elders, we weren't going to embarrass them or have a bad tale follow them. Maybe they'll do better at the next place. Now that I think about it, no, they're incorrigible. They will never do better at the next place.